I expect that we'll continue to be joined by other guests, but I'm pleased to introduce the IIP's Policy Associate, Michelle Mason.
Hi, good morning. On behalf of the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution, I want to thank you for joining our virtual panel on restorative justice. The IIP is a prosecutorial reform think tank dedicated to criminal justice that promotes community-centered standards of safety, fairness, and dignity. This panel is a part of a series of virtual panels that the IIP has been hosting since the COVID pandemic has shifted us to remote operations. We have an upcoming forum this Friday at 1 p.m. on police use of force. And next Wednesday on June 10th at 11 a.m., we'll be hosting a panel on the challenges of coming home from prison during COVID and beyond. You can find registration links for these panels on our socials. The handle is at IIP_John J. We invite you to send questions throughout this panel. You can click the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and send the questions directly to the host. Restorative justice is of particular interest to the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution, as we have been exploring ways to bring acknowledgement of harm and step towards healing into our work through our recent initiatives on trauma-informed prosecution and Indigenous living land acknowledgements. For those who may not know, modern restorative justice derives from ancient and indigenous practices employed in cultures all over the world, including Native Americans. Before our panel, I'd like to read the IIP's land acknowledgement statement, honoring both the land and culture of indigenous people across our country. We want to acknowledge that the IIP is based in New York City, which is Lenape-Hoking, the Lenape homeland. We honor all of the indigenous nations and their land with great gratitude and acknowledge the genocide and continuous displacement of indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge the enslaved Africans whose labor built Manhattan during the colonial era and beyond. We acknowledge the harm inflicted upon the indigenous communities and people of color across the country, which inspires our ongoing work. We would also like to acknowledge the harm law enforcement has caused, especially in the wake of the recent events and the killing of George Floyd. The content of today's discussion may be particularly sensitive, and we encourage you to step away from your device and do what is best for your mental health and safety throughout the discussion. I'm now going to turn it over to our director, Lucy Len.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you to the team at the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution for organizing this event, and many, many thanks to all of the panelists for being willing to offer your experience and your expertise today. Before we begin, I invite you all to join me in a moment of silence to acknowledge these troubling times in our country. I am pleased to introduce Hillary Packer, the Senior Associate in the Department of Restorative Practices at the Center for Court Innovation, to provide some background information and landscape about restorative justice in New York City.
Apologies. Okay, there we go. All right. Thank you so much, Lucy, and to Michelle also for that beautiful land acknowledgement. Thank you to the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution, and to the panelists for your work and for this conversation. And thank you for all of you who are joining. The call for reimagining the criminal legal system is decades old and long overdue. I'm hoping that our collective ability to ignore it has timed out. I was asked to begin today's discussion with a definition of restorative justice, which we at the Center for Court Innovation, after years of learning and practice, still debate amongst ourselves. Is it a philosophy, a belief system, a specific or a process or a set of processes? Deeply rooted, as Michelle said, in Indigenous traditions, we contend with how to adapt something practiced by societies so vastly different than our own. As we do the work of improving school culture, offering community accountability processes as an alternative to court and thinking about how to end intimate partner violence, we employ restorative justice as a framework, a shift for the way we think about community, conflict, and harm. When we think about crime, this shift begins with our perception of what crime really is. Whereas the criminal legal system views crime as a violation of the law that must be prosecuted by the state, restorative justice says crime is a violation of relationships, one that gives rise to a set of needs and an obligation to meet them. It is also a shift in how we think of people who commit crime. A restorative framework says that crime arises out of a set of conditions, including a person's sense of separation and a lost sense of interconnectedness. Our criminal justice system often responds to crime by exacerbating that separation, isolating people in prisons, branding them as felons, severing their relationships with those who love them. Alternatively, restorative justice invites a person who has caused harm closer in, where they must witness the impact of their actions and where they are told that they matter, their actions matter, and then given the opportunity to make right the wrong. Simultaneously, restorative justice invites the person who has been harmed to tell their story, believing in the power of storytelling for its own sake and as a step towards healing. Persons who have been harmed are able to ask questions of the person who harmed them and to participate in determining a way forward. This is based in the belief that those who are most impacted by a problem can chart the most fair and just path forward. Typically, the criminal legal system begins with 3 questions: what law was broken, who broke it, and what do they deserve? Restorative justice instead asks who was harmed, what do they need, and whose obligation is it to meet those needs? To help answer these questions, restorative justice leans heavily on other community members. Whereas the criminal legal system holds responsible only those who were actively involved in a crime, restorative justice allows individual accountability and collective responsibility to coexist. While meeting the needs of the person directly harmed is of primary importance, a restorative process acknowledges the ripple effect of harm, knowing that when one of us is harmed, undoubtedly someone else is impacted. Practitioners in New York City are using restorative justice in the following context: in schools to break the school to prison pipeline and to shift school culture and climate, in workplaces to strengthen staff relationships and address conflict between them, as a tool of decision-making in cases of child welfare, as an alternative to incarceration and for sentence mitigation, as a process to address the trauma of child sexual abuse and sexual assault, and to bring light to and break the silence and cycle of intimate partner violence. I'll end by saying what restorative justice is not. It is not about forgiveness, and it is not a silver bullet. And as we think about reimagining our criminal justice system, a reminder to each of us that simply offering a restorative justice process to people who would otherwise be moved through the court system is not enough. It is not enough now, and it will not undo, account for, make right the wrongs of mass incarceration. It will not alone bring justice, and it will not alone bring equity. Having said that, and being that I am a true believer, I'm so looking forward to hearing how each of you are using this framework to build a more just New York.
Thank you, Hillary, for that really important context setting. I'm pleased to introduce the members of the panel who will wave, and then we will jump into the conversation. In alphabetical order, we are joined by Shailly Agnihotri, who has spent more than 20 years working in criminal law, serving as a prosecutor, a public defender, and now as the founder of the Restorative Center. Eli Almonte-Perez is a trans single parent whose journey towards restorative justice began following a federal probation sentence. At the beginning of COVID quarantine, Eli was inspired to begin attending restorative circles for people directly impacted by criminal legal systems. Aisha Green is the Chief of Alternatives to Incarceration and Mental Health Unit at the Bronx District Attorney's Office, where they provide treatment and resource opportunities, including restorative approaches. She previously served as the director of the Brooklyn Justice Initiative at Brooklyn Criminal Court, where they provided pretrial supervised release for people who would otherwise have been held on bail and offered non-incarceratory sentencing options. Vivianne Guevara is the Director of Mitigation and Client Services at the Federal Defenders of New York, where she began facilitating peacemaking and community building circles in 2014. She is also the founder of Integral Justice. Jinsoo and Julia Kim are crime survivor advocates. They are New Yorkers who found themselves sadly and unexpectedly at the forefront of this reform, and they will tell you more of their story. Jinsoo works in advertising and in the past was a political fundraiser and a professional musician. Julia is a high school ENL teacher, and they are both the parent of a fearless young girl. Julia became interested in restorative justice first through a peace education class at Teachers College. Amaury Rosario is a poet, fiction writer, and fine artist who was originally sentenced to life in prison as a juvenile. But Amaury was released after the Supreme Court's decision in Miller v. Alabama, which ruled that life sentences for juveniles are unconstitutional. Amaury began using restorative practices while he was in prison, and he is now a 2020 Beyond the Bars Fellow at Columbia University's Center for Justice. Larry Williams is a father, advocate, student, and restorative justice practitioner. After 17 years in prison, Larry is currently developing restorative practices in his role as the director of Integral Justice. He is a Beyond the Bars Fellow at Columbia, an outreach director with Just Ideas at Columbia, a debate consultant with the Rikers Island Debate Project, and he works as a legal assistant to Jason Flom. As you can tell, we have an outstanding group of very varied expertise on this subject. I welcome your questions in the chat feature and want to begin by asking Jinsoo and Julia to start with the survivor's experience, because it really is so central to the practice of restorative justice. So if you would share the beginning of your journey before restorative justice was on the table as an option in your case.
Thank you, Lucy. My father was attacked around 2 years ago and ended up in a coma. He died of his injuries shortly afterwards. The man who attacked my father was arrested shortly afterwards, and naturally my feelings were absolute rage, horror, anger. I wanted to see that, to throw the book at him. I wanted him to make sure that, he paid for his crimes. And I think having, like you mentioned, we have a very young daughter, Julia and I think having her be in the equation was so discordant with that anger and the rage that I had a really hard time processing being that angry at somebody at the same time as being so loving and caring towards somebody else. So I could already, from the very first day, I could feel like myself changing. Like it was my whole personality was changing, and it just felt very unnatural to me to be pulled in the direction of blind anger towards somebody, even though what he did was terrible and affected us so terribly.
Aisha, if you would, based on your experience in multiple prosecutors' offices, what would usually happen in a case like the Kims?
So first, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to join such an esteemed panel. As a prosecutor, once you get a case, as a public servant, you are trying to figure out what is the best option to serve the community, to respond to the harmed person, to respond to the complainant, to respond to the victim, and to figure out, what justice requires. And so a lot of that is talking to the complainant, the harm party in the case, and figuring out what to do, thinking about the community and thinking about public safety. So there are ranges of options. Some of them include incarceration, and some may include incarceration for a long time, but there are also other alternatives as far as, probation or non-incarceral alternatives. And I'm very, excited and I love working for District Attorney Clark because, in her first term as district attorney, she sought out restorative justice responses. So I can tell you what happens in the Bronx. We work very closely with Common Justice. where we are considering cases for serious and violent felonies. I'm talking about attempted murder cases, robbery cases, where there's a lot of harm. And it's really important to consider how to go forward. You know, what does it mean for there to be a restorative approach to repairing that harm? We also have restorative justice responses for other cases, so that, you know, it may not, you know, rise to the level or get that far. So we want to make sure that we have a spectrum of responses with respect to restorative approaches. But, you know, as a prosecutor, your job is really to figure out the best option in that particular case. And that includes being innovative and including the complainants to figure out the next step.
Shailly, you bring to this a really wide range of perspective from working within and outside the system. Given your background, what is your view of why restorative justice holds promise for survivors in a case like the Kims, as compared to the more traditional kinds of options that Aisha just described? I'm going to remind you to unmute yourself.
So sorry. As one of my mentors at Georgetown, Professor William Greenhall, used to say, one good prosecutor is worth 100 good defense attorneys. And I didn't really understand it till, you know, thank you, Aisha, because there is such profound opportunity for prosecutors to really embrace the interests of justice for us all, and to recalibrate our relationship with a institution that has disappointed us so profoundly. So your question is very interesting, because what I really think about restorative justice is beyond just looking at the person. I don't use the term harm, because that's a decision that each person, you know, has to make about whether they want to be labeled as one that has been harmed. But as far as how we each respond to a set of circumstances outside of the criminal justice matrix of an adversarial system where we're navigating the relationship between government and citizens, outside of that paradigm, if we can find a place to be in humility with each other, which is what I just heard the Kims speak about, that is the possibility of reclaiming our humanity and listening with listening. This is a very complex thing, and I actually have things to say about what Hillary defined restorative justice at, because my definition is different, because I think we really have to go really to the root issues of disconnect in a way that doesn't label people in the process, to really get to the other side in a more meaningful way. But I'll stop for now.
And I would love to come back to this question about the definition, because it does seem that the range of definitions is as wide as the range of practitioners in many respects. So Vivianne, from the public defender's perspective, and you've spent most of your career in a public defender's office, this approach holds great promise for reducing reliance on incarceration. And in particular, you have used it on some extremely serious cases, including crimes of terror. So can you talk a bit about, from your experience, how this works for the person who is charged with having committed a crime?
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And I agree with Shailly. My definition of restorative justice is ever evolving, depending on what circle I've just been in or just facilitated. So that's an ongoing question for me too. And I think what stands out for me in facilitating circles for people that I work with, including who've committed serious crimes, I feel like I've been blessed because it's not something that I've had to convince anybody to do very much. The cases that I've facilitated circles for in federal practice have come from survivors of crime who want to engage with the people that we work with, who want to forgive the people that we work with and engage in a dialogue, and have already arrived at a place of forgiveness and healing because they've done that work to lead up to that point already. So in that way, I feel very, very grateful to survivors who are forgiving and who are healing and who recognize that the criminal legal system is not one that's going to provide that for them or for the people who may have caused them harm. So in working with people in federal practice and the people with who I work and engaging them in the circle process, it's very moving and it's very healing for them to hear from someone who they may have caused harm to forgive them and to be open with them and to ask questions in a loving and I guess in a way that allows for an authentic dialogue rather than a blaming dialogue. And so the growth that happens for the people with whom I work is immeasurable. It leads to more, I think, wherever they happen to go, whether they're released or whether they have to spend more time in prison, it leads to more healing because of the people that they continue to touch because they've been touched by that circle process. So I'll leave it at that for now. It's just been a very rewarding experience and very moving to be able to provide this for the people with whom I work and also for the people who reach out to us wanting that process. Thank you.
I next was going to ask Larry and Amaury to talk a bit about your unique journey towards restorative practices, but I wonder if you could also in your answer maybe explain to folks who are listening who don't have deep familiarity with these practices, the preparation that happens prior to the actual kind of convening of a restorative circle. Larry or Amaury?
How you doing? Good morning, everybody. It's Amaury. Well, the practice before circle is, for me, it was hard because I didn't know what to expect, and it's totally different from the experience of other programs that you have while you're incarcerated. You know, it was once I was in the circle, it was very eye-opening. You know, it changed my view of how I see things. And there's a lot of different classes and practices that people bring in prison, like yoga, breathing exercises, and others sitting in a circle. But our original plan was to do a circle with my family, and that wasn't allowed by the jail. Then we tried to do one with the people that I've caused harm to, and that wasn't allowed either. So Vivianne introduced me to the practice of restorative justice through the circle, where we talked about forgiveness and healing, also causing harm, and being a recipient of harm. We all were open, and we had to get creative with staff members that participated, because we had to get staff members from the federal defenders to participate, because the prison wouldn't allow anything else. I felt like it was very therapeutic and something that could be used early in prison sentences. After we were done with our circles, I continued to practice in whichever way I could, and helped found Running Free with other federal defenders. That's a program that combines exercise and restorative circles. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Hello, thank you for having me on the panel, and I feel honored to be around people that are actually doing the work. Yeah, so first I would kind of like to say that this has been done, and this is like an indigenous thing, and to honor like the people who have actually started this, which is a cultural thing, right? And a lot of times, sometimes people act like this is something new and innovative, and it's not. Actually, we was removed from it, of our culture, which is colonialism, right? And this actually starts to trailblaze the way, or not actually trailblaze, but actually to go back and start to realize our culture and how this was a process, and it wasn't about incarcerating you and putting you away, right? And it's amazing, and actually like stuff is running through my body because I realized how strong the healing process is. Also, Vivianne had introduced me to the practice of restorative justice. And, why it's so important, from a person that was in prison and spent a lot of time reflecting and realizing. And a lot of people don't understand that there's also a healing process for the person who actually could have caused the harm, right? Because not everybody that's in prison actually did what they're charged of, right? But as far as like when somebody was harmed, like what the circle does is it allows the person who also did the harm to heal as well. And then it allows for an opportunity for the people to understand and ask those questions. And I think the criminal legal system should use that all the time, because I think like the people who have been harmed, you send somebody to prison for a long time, and the system believes that that is retribution and redemption for the person who was hurt, and it's not, because what happens with them is they have a whole bunch of questions that's unanswered. And then the person that sits inside, that person doesn't get an opportunity to heal and try to figure out like how can he be a better person, because the system does not allow you to do that. The system does not allow for therapy, and the system does not allow for you to heal. What the system does is it just warehouses you. And if you actually come and say that something's wrong with you, the only thing they do is try to medicate you, right? So putting restorative justice inside the prison facility and also allowing for a space for the people who are in that situation that have received some kind of harm starts to do something that is amazing and is the restorative part. It starts to heal. And the other part that we also miss is that the community gets to heal. So those three elements, the person who may have caused the harm gets to heal, or the person who caused the harm gets to heal, the person who was harmed gets to heal, and then the community gets to heal. Thank you.
Thank you. When I asked Hillary to provide the introduction, we talked about how it's sort of impossible to give a single definition. And so I appreciate that she set the stage for us and that everyone is engaging around this question of what the practice means to them, what the potential is. And there's a question from the audience from Sethu Nair asking about each person engaging on how you hold the spirit of restorative justice. And so I'd like to put that to you, Eli. What brought you to this, and how do you hold the spirit of this practice?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. What brought me into the restorative justice circle, is that the question? Okay, so what brought me there is that Vivianne sent me the invitation. And she had invited me before, but I could never go because I'm a single parent and my daughter goes to school. So at the time they were held, it was too late for me to attend physically. So when she had it virtually and invited me, I said, yes, I would love to go. And then I went into the circle, and it was, in a way, I would say it was therapeutic. I got to hear people's different experiences. I got to learn from them, hopefully share my life experience and help them grow in a way, because I know they've helped me grow a lot and see things from different perspectives. Especially being in the pandemic and not being quarantined, I'm not able to get out of my head sometimes. So when I go into these circles, I'm able to not only get out of my head, but see things a different way that other ways I wouldn't have been able to. I think it's very healing to me. It helped me tremendously. It really helped me a lot, especially when I was very depressed. I would go into the circle and then I would leave feeling much better and feeling like things will be okay. And I really enjoy it. Thank you.
So as you can hear, we're talking about really a wide range of different practices that fall under the umbrella of restorative justice, and they can happen at very different points in the criminal legal system. So thinking about one in particular, which is to say the use of the criminal legal system's sentencing moment, or the response from prosecutors and courts to crime. I'd like to go back to you, Jinsoo and Julia, and ask you to tell what ultimately happened when you began to learn about the possibility of restorative justice for your father.
Sure. Like I said, at first, I was totally enraged at the man that attacked my father. The more I heard about him, the more I started to feel more sorry for him than angry. He had a very tough life. He lost his father and mother very recently. He was late on his rent. He had no criminal record. He was, just trying to do the right thing. Worked as a security guard, and just fell through the cracks and became desperate enough to, attack my father for the money. The more I heard about his story, the more I thought that, what would my father think? My father was a professor of philosophy. He always promoted justice for all and peace and harmony for everybody. And like I said earlier, just my inner conflict between trying to be as loving as possible as a father and being, having this absolutely uncontrollable hatred towards someone. It was really hard to just stay sane. You really start to lose your mind. So once the option was given, even just given the option to have the meeting, was the first time in this tragedy that we had a choice. Like, we were actually given some amount of control over the situation, some amount of power to decide what to do. So even just given the option to us was very empowering. It was very healing. It was not an easy decision to make. I really had to dwell on it in a while. And I think my answer is, I kind of already alluded to it, just knowing that hating this person was not going to bring my father back, knowing that if I decided to throw the book at him and keep that hatred with me, I'd be bringing it into my house everywhere I went. My daughter would probably learn blind hatred of somebody from day one. And that was just unacceptable with me. And we decided to have the meeting with the man who attacked my father. And I'm absolutely glad we did. Even just hearing his side of the story and hearing directly from him that he was sorry meant a lot to us. It wasn't filtered through his lawyer to somebody else, to us. It was raw. It was undoubtedly true. Like, if somebody, if a lawyer told me that he said he's really sorry and he wants to get a lighter sentence, of course, I would have had some doubt in my mind. Maybe he's lying to everybody, man. How can I believe him? But we were in the same room as him. We were in the same room with him for a while, and there's no doubt in my mind that he was sorry and that he will do his best to stay out of trouble in the future.
And I also think, one thing that crossed our mind was, we had the pain of losing my father-in-law, but also there was this secondary pain of the assailant's life being destroyed, going to prison, and what that looked like for him. And it felt like the restorative justice, the opportunity to meet him and talk with him, to kind of just understand his experience more. It was really important to our just retrieving our humanity back, but also being able to see him more fully and more completely.
I feel that, my father was obviously a victim. We were obviously victimized. The man who attacked my father, he was victimized by society, that he fell through the cracks and nobody cared. There was, he felt like so at the end of his rope that he felt like that was his only option. His sister felt victimized. She felt like she could have done more to prevent it, and she should have been closer to her brother. And there's just so many feelings of people, what could have been done, what should have been done. And none of that would have brought my father back if we didn't listen. We have 2 years and 1 now. and we listened to his side of the story, but listened to his sister was there as well. Hearing her side of the story was also incredibly healing and powerful, because she was also completely like devastated by the attack as well, that she lost a brother to, you know, possibly a very, very long sentence. And yeah, like I said before, she was beating herself up, saying that I should have been more aware of what was going on and I should have helped out more. She was miles away. It was not, she had absolutely no blame in this equation.
It was just, it was so upsetting on so many levels that being able to sit together and just emote, talk about how we felt, where we were coming from, our experience with what had happened, and that allowed for a lot of healing to take place. And once we went to the actual sentencing, we saw what would have happened if we had not had the restorative justice circle, which is that he would have come out with his back to us. We maybe never would have been able to see his face. And then Jinsoo read a statement at the sentencing. He might have been reading his statement just to the back of Mr. Lee's head, and just not having any human connection to him. Like, what happened was deeply, deeply personal, of course. Like, he killed our father-in-law, well, my father-in-law and your father, but it was just to have that, the reconciliation of that just be staring at the back of his head, that would just have left this open sore. Yeah.
So as you can hear, the format that the Kims are talking about is somewhat different from the format that that Eli and others have talked about. And I wonder if Vivianne or Hillary, you could distinguish, and this is a question that comes from another great expert who is a great service to the city, Mika Dashman. Can you clarify the relationship between restorative justice and circles more generally?
I'll take a try, and then I feel like I'm not the best person with definitions. I like for things to be open and organic, but I think restorative justice is what the Kims are talking about, and also what I've tried to do in cases, which is a meeting of someone who has brought everyone together because they caused harm, and it could be that it's a circle to talk about the harm and how to make it right, or how we can move forward and to provide healing. It could also be, and it depends on who's there and what people want in the circle. It could also be people are arriving at a place where they want to talk about everybody's harm, and they want to talk about what everybody can do to take care of each other, even though we've been brought together because of one person's act. So I would describe restorative justice as that, as restoring justice to a multitude of people, whoever is in that circle. I think circles are one part of restorative justice, and there's other forms of restorative justice. A peacemaking circle or restorative circle is one thing that can happen through restorative justice. And circles in general, I think there's so many ways that people, and that I practice circles outside of the criminal legal system and outside of restorative justice. And those can be circles to build community. Those are the circles that Eli is coming to during COVID. We meet on Fridays to talk about either COVID, or to talk about our lives in general, or moving forward, or making plans for ourselves, sharing resources. There can be circles to make decisions, to plan things, to build community in other ways, to strengthen families together, to strengthen whatever ties that you're in. So within an organization, or within a church, or within a faith community, there's just a lot of ways that those are practiced. I think there's another, again, I'm not so good with the definitions and labels, but transformative justice, which I believe are circles that happen outside of systems. So people who are providing circles either in situations of harm, or just people who are processing trauma, not just, but people who are processing trauma, but outside of, say, an organization or outside of a court system, outside of a DA's office, outside of a public defender's office, really community members in the community who are offering, here's what I have for you. It's open, come as you are. We can do this together. I'm here to support you. I'm not gonna call the police. I'm not gonna report this. I'm not gonna take your intake information on a form. We're all just gonna come together as we are. That's how I would define some aspects of circles and restorative justice.
Thank you. And maybe yes, Hillary.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it just occurs to me, I mean, I agree with everything that Vivianne said. And I'm just dying to hear everybody's definition. Told my boss it's like the hardest task anybody has ever given me. So really, I just want to learn from everybody, and I'm like eager to hear what each of your definitions are. But I just wanted, like, I just sort of noticed that we're all talking about circles, and I'm not sure that we've even defined what we mean by a circle for people on the call who are really new to this. So when we're talking about circles, we're actually talking about people physically sitting in a circle together. At CCI, we learned from Navajo teachers. I think as Larry referenced, like, these practices are rooted in a lot of traditions. We happen to learn from the Navajo people. So when we think about a circle, which is one kind of restorative justice process, people are sitting in a circle, and the importance of that is that a really important tenet of the process is that everybody has a chance to be heard, and everybody listens equally. So it's really about sharing power, and that no one person is more powerful than the other. I think the Kims did a really beautiful job describing what happens in a courthouse, right? And where there's clear power, there's clearly someone physically sitting above everybody else. So I just wanted to, typically circles have, or often they have a centerpiece to help us all sort of be grounded, and those can have meanings. Talking pieces are sometimes used, not always. But I just wanted to give people sort of a visual of, when we talk about circles, we're talking about the people who the people who are participating in a restorative justice circle are sitting in that formation, and that's what we are talking about.
I just want to chime in if I could now.
Please.
Yeah. So one of the most interesting things about circles is that circles to me are like, if you think of a pottery, the circle is a structure, actually. And this, for me, the facilitator, the circle keeper, whatever frame you want to use for the person that is organizing the space and making the foundation for it, has to be cognizant of the energy that's going to be expended in the circle, and make sure that the vessel that's being created can actually withstand whatever is going to happen. So in the way that I've understood circles, there is a lighter circle, which would be a community circle, or there could be the most highly charged circle, which would be a full restorative justice circle. So a circle is a process and a foundation for an unwinding of whatever is transpiring within the community amongst the community that will be created in that space. And the circle keeper's responsibility is to move the energy in that circle in a way that is productive for the participants. And in our model, the one I practice, the circle keeper is part of the community. So you're not the outside bureaucrat running the circle with a checklist, you're part of the circle. And also the questions you ask are integral and important to creating the energy of the foundational connection of us as human beings, from which we can arise to our disconnect in a more meaningful way. So we believe, we meaning the TRC model, we believe that the questions have phases that we need to go around in the circle, and that a chief component of it is invoking stories about being on this planet by asking questions about being an elemental relation to water, fire, earth, or the stars, so that first we can remember that we are all actually united in this planet spinning through space, and then we can get to the issues of the more surface disconnect that we experience. And I find the Kim story so moving and so powerful, and the perfect illustration that when we disconnect from others, what we're really doing is disconnecting from ourselves as primal human existence together on this plane. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. It's worth noting that in the Kim's context, even though it happened in a district attorney's office and a family justice center, that the lawyers involved in negotiating that process were not part of the circle. And I have a number of questions from prosecutors' offices from across the country, including from Madison, Wisconsin and Stockton, California. And perhaps, Aisha, you could help respond to this question about what do you do in instances where the survivors may not be initially interested in restorative principles, where people don't have the kind of realization that the Kims had during their own grieving process?
So, it's a really important question, and, I thank you for asking, and I, really want to thank the Kims for sharing their story and being here, because it takes so much to do that. I think it's really important for the experts to really step forward in this work and to help prosecutors to introduce the practices. And so, in thinking about how we do this in the Bronx, there's a conversation that we will have with the complainant, the person that has experienced the harm, to say, are you open to a conversation with someone from Common Justice, or so that they can explain to you what it is and what they want to provide, and whether or not you're interested in this process. And then we step back. And it's important for, the folks who do this work and who are expert in this work to lead that and explain what it is, so that people can answer, ask and answer get their questions asked, get their questions answered, they can get their questions answered, and you don't feel the presence of the state or the city like lording over you and telling you that you have to do something. And so we want to remove that from it. But I do want to also point to something that Larry said, and also something to the Kims mentioned. It's about having different options so that people who have found themselves in the criminal justice system can participate in different ways. There isn't a cookie cutter response to what has happened. And it's really about involving the entire community. I became a prosecutor in Queens County. I live in Queens County. It's my home, it's my community. And so taking public service very seriously, restorative approaches are in line with that. And so, it's important to give agency back to communities and agency to people who find themselves in these systems to figure out what are the best next steps.
You know that there are lawyers listening in when people start asking for statistics. So studies across the country show that 80% of crime survivors who are given restorative justice options express satisfaction with the system, whereas there is really a 30% satisfaction rate generally reported for crime survivors who experience traditional punitive measures. So from this range of perspectives, did any panelists want to respond to what makes restorative justice so successful for crime survivors? And then a question that is surely from a prosecutor who's listening: what do we know about recidivism rates and re-entry into the system after restorative processes?
Well, I guess I'll join in. Like I said before, having this as an option was really empowering to us. It was not, like Aisha said, it was a very free process. It was very fluid. Like if he was not sorry for what he did, if he said that he would do it again and he hated my father, we wouldn't have had the meeting. If he had a long criminal record and people were telling me, the detectives, lawyers were telling me that he was a career criminal and he's killed people before, we would not have had the meeting. But he seemed like a person that just was genuinely a good person, fell through the cracks, was genuinely sorry, And just everything seemed like it was, all those factors contributed to us thinking that deciding that it was the right thing to do, to meet him and have that meeting. And the effect was that, I think a lot of people may have a misunderstanding that to participate in this circle as a survivor and to show mercy and forgiveness to someone who are saying that what happened is not important. It's not true at all. I think what really made things easier for me was to separate my hatred and my grief, because they're easily confused, they're easily overlapping. And I had a choice to let go of my anger towards Mr. Lee, the man who attacked my father. I don't have as much control, and nobody does have as much control over their own grief. That's a whole process. It's a whole different process of healing that I may never fully heal from that wound, but I had the choice to let go of the anger that I felt towards him by having this meeting. And that was immediately healing for myself and for our family, to be in a more just compassionate headspace, just to be more patient and more calm and more accepting of what happened. Nothing would have brought my father back. So what can we do at this point to try to be as positive as possible and to try to cause the least harm possible from this point forward?
We talk a lot at the IIP about how recidivism is an imperfect metric, that perhaps instead of measuring the success of the system based on whether or not someone is arrested or prosecuted again, we might measure things like their pro-social contacts, their employment, their housing, their family relationships. But understanding that recidivism is a very blunt metric, can anyone offer anything to the question about whether this has a different long-term impact than traditional justice responses?
I can talk about the high school programs that we run. And I've noticed that once we started doing the restorative justice process and giving leadership to the teens in the high school to be circle keepers and to run circles, and started teaching administration a different way to manage conflict and violation of codes, the suspension rate dramatically dropped, like 60%. So I think that, I guess what I would advocate for is, if we're looking at the suspension to prison pipeline, we can go further and further back and think about how we can start teaching our young people and our educators of young people new ways to resolve conflict by creating a community around the issues that arise, and giving everybody a sense that there is a space for them to be heard no matter what the situation is.
I also speak to recidivism. I think something that's really important when you have different programs coming and working with the criminal legal system is to make sure that the programs are evaluated. And so a lot of different programs will have either research arms that are connected to them to conduct evaluations, to look at things like recidivism and also pro-social engagements that occur after the quote unquote sentence is done. And so District Attorney Clark was really interested in, inviting community-based organizations to come to the district attorney's office to say, this is the program that I have, this is the way it works. I think it's really, really important to make sure that you're marrying different options, different alternatives to incarceration with that research and that evaluation. So you know what's being measured, you know how it's working, so that you can tell whether or not you're causing any further harm. And so, working with Common Justice and working with Danielle Serid, also in thinking about the spectrum of restorative practices. We work with the Center for Court Innovation and Bronx Community Solutions, and we involve the community for the misdemeanor cases that we have. But I think it's really important to build out a spectrum where we can have restorative approaches throughout, case processing, so we can really think about the populations that we serve so that we can serve them well. But looking at that data is really important. You know, continuing to work with research is really important. When I worked at the center, I was part of the research practice strategies team. And, you know, that's really important to make sure that you're looking at all of those areas. And it's by no accident that District Attorney Clark, she seated the Alternatives to Incarceration Bureau within the Strategic Enforcement Division. And so, you know, you have to have all of those different aspects so that you know the impact that you're having in your criminal practice.
Those are all such important points. And one of the things that often people bring in a critique of restorative justice is a concern that it might not offer accountability, such as it is, which is so often considered one of the paramount priorities of the criminal justice system. So Eli, Larry, or Amaury, based on your own experience, could you share what your view is about the relationship between restorative justice and accountability?
Well, I feel like the relationship between restorative justice and accountability is like hearing the powerful story that Kim just said, right? Like that's the purest that's pure as you can get, you know. Like when you commit a crime, and you get the the chance to go through that process right there, like it's something that when you grow up in the way we grew up in our lifestyle, we never think about that part. Like that's something that when you're young, we're raised to only see our own pain, not nobody else's pain. And when you see somebody's pain, the pain that you caused, that just, you know, you don't change with that. You're never gonna change. Just the fact that you're doing the circle shows the remorse and empathy and the willingness to open yourself with it. Because a lot of people that commit crimes, you know, that you're scared to hear what people have to say about you. It's hard to face somebody that you hurt. And like my whole life, all I want to do is after the crime is be able to show my remorse to the people I first and let them see that that's not who I am. So when I heard what Kim said about when they sat down with him and they seen that the person's, you know, really a good person, that's something you never think that people are going to look at you like that, you know. So I really appreciate them for the time.
I hope you don't mind if I chime in. Thank you for saying that. I think like there's so much focus on what is the appropriate punishment for a crime when it's an important question, of course. The much more important question is, why was this committed in the first place? Like what broke in society that this person was so desperate that they had to do what they did? And that question, you know, is more relevant now than in a long time. And it's something we should all, you know, ask ourselves that, you know, every day.
I'll also add that the circles take a lot of preparation. So even with Amaury, and we weren't meeting with a survivor and we weren't meeting with his family, it was Amaury and me and staff from our office. The preparation for everybody who was going to be in those circles, it took a lot of time. Number one, to explain the process and what we were actually going to do. And then to talk about people's fears, people's concerns, people's hopes and expectations, talking about letting go of expectations when we were sitting there. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into it, and it depends on at what point people are when they're entering the circle, when they're entering, what they know about the circle process, where they are in their healing process. All of that happens before the circle. So it's not simply people have agreed to be here, let's all show up and do this. There's a lot that goes on beforehand in those types of circles. I think, Larry, you're gonna say something, sorry.
Hello, yeah, so she kind of stole my thunder in a way, and what I was gonna talk about is the pre-work, right? And that's what she was talking about, she meaning Vivianne. And yeah, it's a process, and a lot of people don't understand the pre-work that goes in. So as an example, Vivianne will have to meet with the Kims, also will have to meet with, as an example, Amaury or me or Eli, and then also meet with the prosecutor and also meet with the lawyer. And it's a whole giant process that goes in. And then it's the actual circle. But then also what's important, and I think people should also pay attention to, is the afterwork. And maybe I don't hear a lot about the afterwork, but the afterwork is like, it's an ongoing process, because even you could still hear that there's pain in the Kim family, right? And there's also pain for the people that have committed the crime. And then it's also like not only healing the community, but also allowing the community to be aware of these things, right? And one other thing I wanted to address is that, you asked about the accountability. Yes, accountability is very important. And just as you heard Amaury speak, and he talked about his accountability, but a lot of times we ignore the other accountabilities. What's the other accountabilities? The other accountabilities is how the prosecutors are actually overzealous, and more so in wanting to fight for justice, that they want to raise and push their career, right? And then you got lawyers, right? The public defenders and 18B lawyers that really just want to, that don't have the resources nor the staffing to be able to actually help these people to fight their cases, right? And then let's talk about America, right? America as a whole has not allowed people who are minorities, and specifically Black and brown, to have an opportunity to heal wholeheartedly in slavery. And then even as an example, I wanted to segue into what's happening today, right? What's happening today is that a Black person is getting killed by the police, right? And then there's zero accountability. And why I say it's zero accountability is because what happens is that a police officer knows and understands, whether it's in the subconscious, that when he does certain acts, that even the jury will not convict him, right? And then Black and brown people and even, Caucasian people, they actually go out there and they start the protest, right? But I say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, asking for a different result. So I think it's important to educate the people and start teaching them how to put the right prosecutors in position, and their voting rights, how to put the proper legislators in position, right? And how to make sure that you hold the lawyers accountable for what they're supposed to do, right? And then I think that it's important to actually understand the plight of the people who are being oppressed, and to figure out a way or how to change the system and also the narrative. And I know I went a little off topic, but yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm accountable for what I did, but what also happens is that prosecutors actually overcharge, right? It's like almost like when you go to a car salesman, right? And the car salesman raises the price of the car, right? And then when you go there, you haggle him for the price, he actually already had a price that he would be willing to work with. And what happens in these systems is that they overcharge, and then the lawyer comes and say, hey, I got a great deal for you. And actually, that was really what they did, if not less. So accountability, I have accountability. I feel sorry for what I did. I also feel sorry because I was overcharged. I also feel sorry for the community that was harmed. And I also feel like there has to be something, right, that has to change. I don't know how. I pointed out some things, but I really want everybody that's on this panel and everybody that's listening to really sit to think about what happened. And then my last thing, and I'll be quiet, is that a lot of times the people that are in position and actually getting all these fundings and all this stuff are actually the people that really don't understand what the person is actually going through. And it's a lot of people that, one way how you heal people like myself and Amaury and Eli is actually putting them in position to be able to help the people that's coming behind them. And a lot of that doesn't happen. Like there should be some type of coalition thing in place to have people like the Kims and have people like myself or like Amaury and Eli to be able to sit down and have these conversations so that we can figure out how to progress what we're doing here. And with that, I'll be quiet. I'm sorry.
I hope it's all right.
No apology necessary, Larry. I really appreciate you and want to get to that subject. I see Aisha, you were going to add something.
Yes, and I really, the question, to whom are we accountable? I think that's a question that everybody in the criminal legal system has to ask themselves. It's not seated in one space, and I think that as humans, we try to pigeonhole people into certain categories, but that really can't and that shouldn't be done, especially when you're looking at restorative practices. There are going to be people who find themselves in the criminal justice system, and Larry talked about this, who have also been harmed. And so it's, what happens with their harm. And so accountability is a question that has to be asked all around. It has to be asked of every person who's there. And what do you do? What do you do to forward, and what do you do to hold yourself accountable to those that you serve?
Thank you. I want to kind of drill down on this question, and so I'm going to read from Louisa Hext, who is tuning in from Minneapolis, and she points out what a tragic time it has been there, and asks, is there a place for restorative justice practice as the community heals from the murder of George Floyd? May his name be a blessing. So in our work at the IIP, in the beginning of our classes, we ask that all members of the class presume best intentions from other classmates. And so I welcome all of you to share your thoughts and ask that everyone presume the best intentions of people who are here trying to think on this incredibly troubling and difficult question.
I do think that there's an opportunity there. I am a person who thinks there's an opportunity for restorative practices and restorative justice everywhere and in every situation. It depends on who is coming to the table and who's done their work to enter that circle or whatever meeting that is. But I think that it's appropriate everywhere. And in with the police, there's so many levels where restorative justice or restorative practices can be used. Number one, with the people who are wanting to create change can meet together in circle to make those plans and decisions and process whatever their own healing is. People are coming from different places in different ways. On another level, I know that there are people who work with police organizations on their particular type of healing. So I can see that kind of affinity group meeting separately and just talking about what their goals are, who wants to change, who doesn't want to change, who's in what frame of mind in whatever law enforcement agency they work in. I think there's definitely law enforcement who are wanting to heal the community, who enter that profession wanting to heal, and definitely officers for sure who do not enter that type of work to heal. They enter to punish. So figuring out who those people are and having them talk about what their goals are and where they come from in an honest, authentic way, there's an opportunity there. And then when the community is ready to come together, bringing folks together to talk about how to move forward, what needs to change, and really implementing those changes. So like Larry was talking, the work that happens after, a lot of us are having Zoom calls and meetings and making plans or talking about really important topics. And then it's what happens afterwards. Who's going to continue doing the work? Who's going to do the internal work? And then find other people to actually make those changes and implement changes. And so that's going to be very important, because it hasn't gone away in however many years of this country, and it's not going to go away until people really start making changes. And restorative practices can be that decision-making, the way to make decisions and make plans. It's not for, at a certain point, somebody has to break the circle and have a discussion and write things down and talk. But it is a way, I think it was Shailly who was talking about eliminating the power dynamics, eliminating power structures within that way of speaking that will hopefully allow for an authentic discussion and authentic plan making. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. I'm reminded by Mika Dashman that the coalition that Larry is calling for does exist in New York City. It's called Restorative Justice Initiative, and all of you are welcome to join there. Please see their website at restorativejustice.nyc. We at the IIP will pull together the websites that have more information and resources from all of the organizations that folks here are talking about, and you can feel free to look at prosecution.org for more information, and that will be up later today. I want to think sort of big picture about some of the questions that Larry raised. And Rebecca Lerman asks, this reminds me of practices used in transitional justice, such as post-Rwanda genocide. I wonder if you think there are areas where it should be used to address systemic racism, and that has been coming out in the conversation. Do folks have specific thoughts on that question?
So just to tag in, as far as I think the biggest part is, to be honest with you, is the realized racism and slavery. And I think also one of the things that would be important is to pay reparations, because I think when you pay reparations, that's a way that you start to build the people and allow them to build their community. And then you also allow them to heal, because America starts to admit openly that racism exists and it's wrong. And this is one way to start the healing process. The other things is to get this message out to more and more people. And for the people that's doing the work, don't do the work for yourself, do the work for the community. And don't become too big in your position, nor too complacent. Like, there's a lot of people out there that needs to be healed. And if you don't know how to heal, I'm gonna tell you very easily, there's people all over the United States that are hurting and in pain and suffering and are poor. A lot of times people are talking about the looting, right? And then I ask the question, why do they loot? Did you ever think about that? Do people that have things, do they loot? No. If you have things, you're not gonna loot. So like, yeah, it's a big issue out there, like why people are looting. But then I think there's a bigger question inside of that. Why are people in a position where they feel they have to loot, right? And yeah, I think that's where it starts. And I would like my fellow panelists to tag in with me.
I feel like we're, I'm sorry, go ahead, Vivian.
Right. Go ahead, Shailly.
No, I mean, Larry said I felt like, what I feel like saying is, I feel like we're on a boat in the middle of the hurricane, okay? We're all on this boat together. And as soon as we forget that, we're not gonna make it to the other side. And what I have found in the circle work that I have had the privilege of being in is that it's a unique space that no other space that I have ever been in has allowed the level of connection that we have felt amongst each other to discuss the most difficult issues of our society: racism, sexism, gentrification, gender issues. It gives us a space to be human again, because what our institutions have done over and over again is dehumanize us and made us, and won by dividing and conquering, which they are trying to do once more. It's the antidote.
Thinking a little bit in a different context about ongoing and generational harm, I wonder if anyone can speak to the potential for restorative justice use in domestic violence situations. There's a concern from a listener that abusers could use restorative justice to further manipulate a victim, et cetera. So I wonder if anyone has thoughts about those possibilities.
I do. So I see the concern, and I think that concern actually existed in any could exist in any circle where there's somebody who caused harm and somebody who's been the recipient of harm. And I think it goes back to the preparation and the work. I think once, like Shailly was talking, about when we come into circle, we are human again. And just as the power dynamics fade away, the authenticity or not of people is also kind of highlighted in there. So the preparation for somebody who has caused intimate partner violence and that person who has experienced it that preparation that happens beforehand is going to be extremely key, so that there isn't any manipulation, so that if that manipulation does exist, it will be plainly seen in circle. So circles, I will also add, they're not all friendly. They're not all people coming together who are already at peace. Mm-hmm. There's conflict in circles. There's circles that stop because there's too much conflict within the circle that's happening at that moment, and then people come back together. There's people that show up to circle who want to be there, but maybe aren't ready for the work. And that all comes out when you're sitting there. And it doesn't, and the person who's facilitating won't necessarily continue it. Anybody can stop the circle if they feel unsafe or they feel unsupported. What also happens in a circle, which we haven't talked about, is if you're coming and you're meeting with somebody who has caused harm, there are support people there that you bring with you, hopefully, that are there to support you, to give you guidance if you need it in that process, to give you some consolation in that process if you need it. And that happens for the person who's caused harm as well. So all of those things coming together, like I said before, I think that it could happen in any situation. I am a survivor of intimate partner violence. I have tried to engage in a circle with somebody who harmed me. It didn't turn out well, but not because I didn't feel safe, just because the preparation wasn't there on all parties' part. And I don't know how you measure that, but once you get in the circle, you can tell. So I'll leave it at that.
So So sorry, I also wanted to just add too that there are, within restorative responses and approaches, there are also different ways to do it. And so, in engaging with different experts in this area, you can also have someone who will sit in a circle who is a proxy. So it's not the actual person that the harm was caused to, but it's someone who may have been in a relationship where there was intimate partner violence. And so there are different ways to do this and different ways to prepare. But I think it's a necessary tool for communities to engage one another so that we can learn to live together.
And on the domestic violence and intimate partner violence front, does anyone have a thought as to why it is not used more in the system, especially at this moment when we're seeing an increase in domestic violence during shelter in place and quarantine?
I think in general, people are worried about the time that it takes to put this all together. So the preparation, the sitting down, how many sessions are there going to be in the circle? But my answer always to that is, if you think about how long it takes for a case to move through the court system, any court case, the preparation and the process for a restorative justice circle is much less and provides so much more.
There are so many smart questions that folks are raising, and we're not going to get to all of them before we have to conclude. But I do want to ask Eli in particular about coming to this from a trans advocacy lens. Do you see anything uniquely promising about the possibilities for restorative justice in the LGBTQIAP community based on your experience?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
Coming at it through a lens as a trans advocate, do you see anything unique from that perspective about this kind of process?
To be honest, I'm sorry, it's just a lot to take in. At this moment, I can't really think about it, but I know that once I learn how to be a circle keeper, I'll be able to bring this and help the community, especially trans women of color, that are the highest to be most likely attacked. Like, I'm a trans man, so I go out there, people view me as a man, I never fear for my life, And I think it would help a lot to build the community, especially trans women that don't have the money to be able, basically we call it passing. A trans woman that doesn't pass as a cis woman is most likely to get attacked than a trans woman that does pass, if that makes any sense. So I'm hoping to be able to learn from Vivianne on how to do the circle keeping and be able to help I mainly want to focus on trans women because they are the most attacked, the most vulnerable, and be able to help us all come together and grow as human beings who happen to be living a transgender experience. I hope that answered your question. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to take in. It's a lot of information. Thank you, everyone. I'm learning a lot.
It is a lot. There are a lot of granular questions about how these practices can intersect with the criminal justice system. And I will say, from where we sit watching prosecutors' offices nationally, there are myriad different places in the process where there could be restorative justice opportunities. There's no single time in the process for an intervention. It could be pre-charging, it could be post-charging, it could be plea negotiations, it could be post-sentencing, it could even be after someone has completed the terms of their sentence. But before we go to a sort of final round of thoughts from all the panelists, I do want to lift up that there are many advocates and practitioners who feel that this really doesn't belong in the criminal justice system at all, and that in fact the criminal justice system's co-opting of restorative practices is in some ways undermines that the integrity of the process and the philosophy. And I wonder if any of you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I think I wrote a whole law review article on it. I think I sent you a link. I don't know if we can figure out how to put it in the group chat or whatever. I think there is as a lover of the United States Constitution, no matter how dysfunctional the manifestation of it is in this moment, as having stood up next to people who had to plead guilty or representing people in court and relying upon the constitutional amendments for protection, I don't want to dilute the Constitution with our good-willed intention, because we know what the path of good intentions can lead to. So what I'm advocating for consistently and hopefully, is that we need discernment in how we use restorative justice under the umbrella of the criminal justice system, which is designed by necessity to be adversarial because it is managing the relationship between government and citizen. Yes, it needs reform. On the other hand, restorative justice is a powerful potential that I really think is about us reclaiming our own individual power, our group power, and therefore then demanding that institutions reflect who we truly are. So I think it's a complex question. And I think at this moment in time, the last thing we need is a bandage on a deep wound. Okay, we don't need that. We've been there, done that. And I teach a class and we're a law class and we're going through the Rodney King case. Are you kidding me? We're back at square one. So we cannot just keep doing superficial things to address deep, profound wounds. We need to go deeper. And the restorative justice potential is so profound and so deep and so transformative that I would be pained that all if it became is a little side boutique place in the criminal justice system. That would be a disservice to this moment in time.
Thank you. And I can see that from the 180 folks who are here today who have been part of this conversation, that there is tremendous hunger for people to be involved, to be advocates, to think about how they can help. And so perhaps someone can speak to this question of how can transformative justice be used to heal the harm to an entire community? What can non-criminal justice practitioners do to help us, especially in this unique and urgent time?
I could say something to that. I think one of the things is to make sure that we figure out ways collectively to heal the community, right? And the other thing I wanted to say, that we have to have a call to action, and also we need to defund the police department because they are overfunded and they start to use all of that funding to oppress the people. So what I ask is to take some of that money or half of that money and to give it to the people with healing, restorative justice circles, and therapy.
Thank you. There's a question from the audience about what are the barriers to this entering mainstream criminal justice. And before we conclude, I will say that from my perspective, I think that it is very often a lack of imagination, and that ways that we all can help, whether inside the system or not, is to, as Shailly says, not waste this moment and try to reimagine something vastly different. Hillary, were you going to add something on that score?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Larry said is absolutely on point. But I also think if you're interested in this particular work, the first place that like we all have to start is with our own communities. I think the connection that Shailly described so beautifully, and being in touch with our humanity and our humanness is something that we all have to think about. I think for people who are asking about how this process can offer accountability or question, the way that people are held accountable by a process like this is to reflect upon our own ways of being accountable to one another, the people who sleep by your side every day. Just wanted to add that's a practice that we can all be doing, and sitting in circle with those that we know and thinking about the harm that we inflict on the people that we love every day.
Thank you. So we are in this heartbreaking time, but perhaps it's a moment of great possibility. With much of the standard mechanics of the criminal justice system on hold, there is an opportunity ahead for a transformed system that could offer real healing of the kind that we have been exploring together today. I invite you to continue to follow our work and the work of all of these outstanding organizations, organizers, and advocates. You can follow us at IIP_John J, and we will post all of the resources that have been mentioned on our social media and at prosecution.org. Please join us in advocating for a better system for our city that can better serve the powerful diversity of people who are harmed, who commit harm, and all of us who seek healing. And again, I particularly invite you to join us on Friday for our conversation on police use of force, where we hope to implement some of the practices we've explored here with a real diversity of voices. Now I'd like to ask each panelist in just one sentence to share your hope for the future of criminal justice in New York City when we emerge from COVID and as we continue to grapple with the long existing racialized trauma that we are living through. Perhaps, yes.
And it's also tying into a question that was asked like maybe 2 or 3 questions ago. To those that are concerned about keeping the process intact, I think my reply would be, do you think the process works? I mean, why are you so concerned with keeping something that's completely broken intact when there are other options to change things? The Constitution itself has amendments. It was designed to be changed. So keep that in mind as well.
And just to piggyback on that, I think that one of the biggest questions coming out of this should be, what is accountability? What does that look like? And let's expand our idea of accountability. Is 10 years enough for a sentence? Is 7? Does that matter? I mean, what about being accountable to each other? What about being accountable to society and to the community?
And to tack on to what Larry said, like way in the beginning, restorative justice circles was the process originally. It has been a tradition for a long time. So that's the original process.
Integrating people back into the community is what we should be accountable for doing as part of the criminal justice system.
Eli, any concluding thoughts?
I'm sorry, what was the question? I tend to just focus on what is being said.
Just your hope for the criminal justice system in the future in New York City in one sentence.
Okay, I would say that my hope is education, because I think throwing money at the situation doesn't help if people don't know what to do with that money. And also, I know it was one sentence, education, and also open and honest communication. We need to stop lying to ourselves, and that comes across every aspect. So that's my sentence. Thank you.
Aisha?
So my hope is that we recognize the opportunity that we've been given as we emerge from all the things that are happening, because it's been happening for so long. And somebody said we find ourselves, right back, looking at certain events that have happened. And here we are, 20 years later, And so, I really hope that we hold fast to the opportunity, that we are innovative, that we do this with intentionality, and that, again, like the Kims mentioned, that we really have to think about accountability and to whom we are accountable in the system that we currently have.
Thank you. Amaury?
I hope that restorative justice is offered as an option to help people heal, process trauma from their own life like poverty, incarceration, generational racism, police violence, and in a way that is not punitive.
Thank you. Hillary?
I don't think we have to wait and for after COVID to be hopeful. I think that my deep wish would be that everyone sees that today is an opportunity, that today thousands and thousands and thousands of people could be released from prison safely, and that anybody who's looking for something to do should pressure their governors to do so.
Thank you. Shailly?
I'd like this to be an opportunity to recalibrate what it means, what justice means.
And Vivianne, I'd like for you to share your final thoughts for the future of justice, and then I know that you have a concluding offering with which we will conclude our proceedings today. Many, many thanks to folks who tuned in, and incredible thanks to the panelists for sharing, but especially for the incredible work you do on behalf of our city. Vivianne?
Thank you. Larry, did you say your last sentence yet?
No, I didn't. And here it is.
It's
I'm
okay.
so sorry, Larry.
No, it's all right. I appreciate that. I think that we should have more platforms like this, but more importantly, action. Like a lot of times people talk, but they don't commit to the action. And I also would like to say freedom plans and start to break down this incarceral state. And as far as people who are formerly incarcerated, start putting them in position in places that they can provide not only opinions, but actually be doing the work and give them their value.
Thank you. So my hope when we emerge from COVID.
Vivianne, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I am? Okay. Can you hear me? Oh, everybody can hear me. Sorry. Can you hear me, Lucy? Oh. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. So my hope when we emerge from COVID is that just specifically that, you know, that in federal court and courts all around, we've been limited because of COVID. So the opportunity to speak with people, to speak with our clients has been extremely limited. And so my hope, and it was before. So speaking with prosecutors, speaking with judges about restorative justice happened few and far between. And so my hope when we emerge is that we can have, at least in federal court, discussions with prosecutors that are human to human, and we can stop wearing the mask that we all wear in our profession and sit down like human beings and talk about things like human beings in a restorative way, not necessarily a circle, but in a human to human way. I'm gonna close this out with something from a book called Beyond Survival. It's about transformative justice. It's from the foreword, which was written by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. It's about the actual book, but where it says book, I'm going to replace with circle. This is a generous circle created by people who imagine that a more ethical and loving world can emerge in the middle of the worst muck of racialized, ableist heterocapital. The primary offering here is a space to be. Be here, be all over the place, be messy, be wrong, be bold in your hopefulness, be confused in community, be reaching past isolation, be part of the problem, be hungry for after, be helpful in the midst, be so early in the process, be broken by belief, be bolstered by brave comrades, be unbelievably unready, be alive. Let this circle be with you like air is with you on a screaming planet, not clean but necessary, not comfortable but supportive. Let this circle be with you like our ancestors are with us, not perfect but instructive, not finished but full. Let this circle be with you like I am with you, curious and unrealistic like you are with yourself, problematic and prophetic and possible, eternally available for transformation based on your still having something to learn and to teach us. Thank you, everyone.